I returned to Greyhaven expecting to bury my father, not my own future, but at the reading of the will, while my sister Ava dabbed dry eyes and inherited the lake house, I received a single sheet of paper claiming I had already spent my share. They thought cutting me out was the end of the transaction. They forgot that I was the only one in the room who knew how to balance a ledger, and I intended to collect. The drive back to Greyhaven felt less like a homecoming and more like a descent into deep water. The highway stretched out in a gray ribbon under a slate sky, the trees bordering the road stripping away the years I had spent building a life in Boston. Every mile marker seemed to peel back a layer of the thick skin I had grown, exposing the raw nerve endings of the girl who had left this place at 18. I was 33 now. I had a career in forensic accounting that required precision, silence, and an ability to see the ugly truths people tried to hide in neat rows of numbers. But as I pulled my rental car up the winding driveway of the Phillips estate, none of that competence seemed to matter. I was just Lucy again, the one who left, the one who wasn't there when he died. My father's death had been slow, a gradual dimming of a bright light, and I had stayed away. I told myself it was because I could not afford the time off work, or that the flights were too expensive, but those were lies. The truth was that I was a coward. I could not handle the slow decline, the oxygen tanks, the hushed conversations, and worst of all, the performance of grief that my stepmother, Mary Ann, and my sister, Ava, had turned into a full-time occupation. Now, I was too late. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, a physical weight that made it hard to take a deep breath. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling Victorian monstrosity that Mary Ann had spent the last decade renovating into something that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not in the real world. Black cars lined the circular drive. The funeral reception was already underway. I parked and checked my reflection in the visor mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, but my face was composed. I wore a simple black dress, tailored and severe, nothing like the flowing, sympathetic fabrics I knew Mary Ann would be draped in. When I entered the foyer, the smell hit me first. Lilies, hundreds of them. The scent was cloying, masking the underlying smell of old wood and floor wax. The murmur of voices drifted from the great room, a low hum of polite sympathy. Ava found me before I could even take off my coat. She looked stunning. Of course, my younger sister had always possessed a kind of luminous quality that drew eyes to her, a fragility that made people want to protect her. She was wearing a vintage black silk dress that I recognized from our grandmother's closet, refitted perfectly to her frame. She came toward me with open arms, her eyes glistening with tears that did not quite smudge her eyeliner. "Lucy," she breathed, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than an embrace. "You made it." I hugged her back, feeling the sharp angles of her shoulder blades. "I am sorry." "Ava." The flight was delayed. She pulled back, her hands resting on my upper arms. She looked at me, her expression shifting subtly. The grief remained, but behind it, there was a steeliness I knew well. "Mom is in the solarium receiving the mayor," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen, Luce, just keep it classy today, okay?" I blinked, the words landing like a soft slap. "Excuse me? You know what I mean," she said, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on my shoulder. "You have a way of getting intense. Just let Mom have this day. Do not cause a scene about the arrangements or why you were not here at the end. Everyone is already whispering about it. We do not need you making it worse." The implication was clear. I was the unstable one, the selfish one, the one who needed to be managed. "I will not cause a scene." "Ava," I said, my voice steady despite the spike of anger in my gut. "I am here to bury Dad. That is all." She gave me a sad, pitying smile, the kind you give to a slow child. "Good. I just want us to be a family today." She turned and floated back into the crowd, accepting condolences with the grace of a practiced widow, even though she was only the daughter. I watched her go, realizing with a sick lurch that the narrative had already been written. I was the prodigal daughter who returned only when it was too late, likely looking for a handout. I spent the next 2 hours in a daze, accepting handshakes from people who looked at me with varying degrees of judgment. Marianne was seated in a high-backed velvet chair, holding court. When I finally approached her, she looked up at me with glassy eyes. "Lucy," she said, extending a cold hand, "he asked for you. You know, at the very end, it was a lie. I knew it was a lie designed to twist the knife, but it worked. I felt the tears prick my eyes, hot and shameful. I am sorry. Marianne," I said. She sighed. A long, tragic sound. "We did the best we could without you." By the time the last guest left, I felt hollowed out. I had not cried at the graveside. I had stood stoically while Ava sobbed into a lace handkerchief and Marianne leaned heavily on the arm of the priest. My lack of public tears was just more evidence for their case against me. Lucy the cold, Lucy the unfeeling. The next morning, the reading of the will was scheduled for 10 o'clock at Hartwell and Sloan Legal Group. The offices were in the city, a 40-minute drive from the estate. The conference room was lined with mahogany and smelled of leather and dust. Mr. Sloan, a man I remembered as being ancient even when I was a child, sat at the head of the table. Marianne sat to his right, looking pale and fragile in charcoal gray. Ava sat next to her, clutching her hand. I took the chair on the opposite side. Alone. There was no small talk. Mr. Sloan cleared his throat, adjusted his spectacles, and began to read. It started with the usual boilerplate language, revoking prior wills and naming the executor. Then came the specific bequests. To my beloved wife, Marianne, I leave the entirety of my personal effects, the contents of the safe deposit box at First National, and the residuary estate, excluding the specific carve-outs detailed below. I watched Marianne's face. She did not react. She knew this already. To my daughter, Ava Phillips, I leave the property known as the Lake House, along with the investment portfolio held at Vanguard, and the controlling 51% interest in Phillips Meridian Holdings. I stiffened. Phillips Meridian was the family business. It was a mid-sized commercial real estate firm that my grandfather had built and my father had expanded. Giving Ava control was insane. Ava had a degree in art history and had never worked a day in the corporate office. Mr. Sloan continued, his voice droning on, listing smaller assets. Finally, he looked up and met my eyes. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before looking back down at the paper. Regarding my daughter, Lucy Phillips, the will read. The room went silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit. I acknowledged Lucy as my daughter. However, due to the substantial financial assistance provided to her during my lifetime, specifically the advance on her inheritance executed in 2016, she is considered fully and already provided for. No further distribution shall be made to her from this estate. The words hung in the air, nonsensical and sharp. I waited for the punchline. I waited for Mr. Sloan to say there was a mistake, but he simply set the paper down and folded his hands. I stared at him. "Excuse me?" I said. The silence of my own voice surprised me. Mr. Sloan looked uncomfortable. "As the will states, Lucy, your father felt that the advance you received 7 years ago constituted your fair share of the estate." "What advance?" I asked. My voice was rising. Despite my promise to myself to stay calm, I never received an advance. I have not taken a dime from my father since I graduated college. Marianne made a small, pained noise. "Lucy, please, do not do this." "Do not do what?" I turned to her. "This is a mistake. I never received any money. What is he talking about?" Mr. Sloan opened a folder in front of him. "I have the documentation here. Lucy, it is quite clear. A family advancement agreement, signed by you and your father in August of 2016, along with a promissory note acknowledging a loan of $480,000, which was subsequently forgiven and converted to an inheritance advance. $480,000. The number was so specific, so massive, that it knocked the wind out of me. I never signed that. I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. I was not even in Greyhaven in August of 2016. I was living in Chicago. Ava looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. Lucy, stop lying. Dad told us about it. He said you were in trouble. Gambling debt or something? He never wanted to talk about the details because it upset him so much. He bailed you out. I felt the blood drain from my face. Gambling debt? I have never gambled in my life. Marianne reached into her purse and pulled out a tissue. He wanted to protect your reputation, she said softly. That is why we never brought it up. We knew you were ashamed. I looked around the table. They were looking at me like I was a relapsed addict, a problem to be managed. The gaslighting was so precise, so coordinated, that for a split second, I questioned my own memory. Had I taken money? Had I blacked out a year of my life? No, I was a forensic accountant. I knew every penny I had earned and spent for the last decade. I want to see it. I said, show me the signature. Mr. Sloan slid a photocopy across the polished wood. I looked at the document. It was titled Family Advancement Agreement. At the bottom, above a date line typed as August 14th, 2016, was a signature. It read, Lucy Phillips. It looked like my signature, the loop of the L, the sharp cross of the T, but it was slightly off. The slant was a degree too vertical. It was a good forgery. But it was a forgery. This is not my signature, I said, pushing the paper back. Mr. Sloan sighed. Lucy, these documents were notarized. Your father filed them with his personal records. I am telling you, I did not sign this. I did not receive $480,000. Marianne leaned forward. Her voice was soft, maternal, and dripping with poison. Lucy, we know you are upset about the business going to Ava. But please, do not dishonor your father's memory by lying about his generosity. He saved you. She reached into her folder and pulled out a checkbook. Look, she said, we want peace. I know it is hard to come back here and face everyone. Even though you have already received your share, I am willing to offer you a transition stipend to help you get settled back in Boston. She wrote on the check, ripped it out, and slid it across the table next to the fake agreement. $10,000. Just sign a waiver today, Marianne said, confirming you accept the will as stated. We can put this all behind us, for everyone's healing. I looked at the check. $10,000 to shut up and walk away, to accept the narrative that I was a leech who had drained her father dry and then abandoned him. My first instinct was to scream. I wanted to tear the check up and throw it in her face. I wanted to flip the heavy mahogany table. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but then the training kicked in. The part of me that spent days staring at spreadsheets, looking for patterns, looking for the tiny discrepancies that unraveled billion-dollar frauds. If I exploded now, I proved them right. I became the unstable, greedy daughter. If they had gone to the trouble of forging a document for $480,000, there was a paper trail. Money did not just vanish, it went somewhere. And if they were trying to buy me off this quickly, they were afraid I would look for it. I took a deep breath. I forced my hands to uncurl from fists into flat palms on the table. I picked up the photocopy of the agreement. I did not pick up the check. I am not signing anything today. I said, my voice was lower, controlled. I need copies of all of this. The will, the advancement agreement, the promissory note. Marianne's eyes narrowed slightly. Lucy, really, there is no need to drag this out. I am not dragging it out. I said, standing up, I am reviewing the documents. That is standard procedure. Mr. Sloan looked at Marianne, then back at me. Of course, we can provide copies. I waited while his assistant made the copies. The room was silent. Ava stared at the table. Marianne watched me with the gaze of a predator assessing a threat. When I walked out of the office 10 minutes later, clutching a manila envelope, my legs were shaking so hard I barely made it to the car. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, gasping for air. They stole it. They stole everything and blamed me for it. I drove aimlessly for a while, not ready to go back to the hotel, and certainly not ready to go back to the estate, but eventually, A morbid curiosity took over. I needed to see the house again. I needed to see what else they had erased. I pulled into the driveway of the estate in the early afternoon. The catering vans were gone. The house was quiet. I let myself in with the key I still had on my ring. A small mercy that they had not changed the locks yet. Marianne and Ava were likely still in town. Debriefing with the lawyer, I walked up the grand staircase, my hand trailing on the banister. I turned left, down the hall to the room that had been mine for 18 years. I pushed the door open. I expected it to be changed. Of course, maybe a guest room, maybe storage. I was not prepared for the total erasure. The walls, once a soft blue, were painted a sterile, clinical white. My bed was gone. My desk, where I had studied for my SATs, was gone. The bookshelves that held my childhood collection of novels were gone. In their place were 3 yoga mats rolled in the corner, a massage table, and a shelf filled with essential oils and crystals. It was a wellness office. Ava's wellness office. I stepped inside, my heels clicking loudly on the refinished hardwood. There was not a single trace of me left. No nail holes where my posters had been. No scratches on the floor where I had dragged my dresser. It was as if I had never existed in this house. I felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just the money. It was the history. They had edited me out of the family story years ago. The disinheritance was just the final paperwork. I walked over to the window, looking out at the gardens. Rough day? I spun around. Elliot Crane was standing in the doorway. He was the estate manager, a man who had worked for my father for 20 years. He was in his 60s now, his face weathered, holding a lit cigarette which he was definitely not allowed to smoke indoors. "Elliot," I said, wiping my face quickly. "I did not hear you." He took a drag of the cigarette and exhaled toward the hallway. "I heard about the will. Sloane's secretary talks." I laughed bitterly. News travels fast in Greyhaven. He walked into the room, looking at the massage table with disdain. $480,000. Huh? That is a specific number. It is a lie. "Elliot, I know." He said simply. I froze. "You know?" Elliot tapped ash into his cupped hand. "Your dad was tight on cash the last few years. Lucy, he was stressed. He loved you, but he was weak. Marianne ran the show. If you know it is a lie, will you testify?" I asked, a spark of hope flaring. He shook his head. "I cannot. I have a pension to think about, and Marianne controls the checks now. But I will tell you this." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "The estate is leveraged more than it looks on paper. On the surface, it is all country clubs and ribbon cuttings, but underneath, the cash flow has been weird for a long time." "Weird how?" I asked. "Money moving out? Big chunks? Under the cover of charity? Bright Hollow Foundation? You heard of it? The family charity." I said, "They do scholarships." Elliot smirked. "They do a lot of things. Look, Lucy, you are smart. You always were. Do not fight them with emotions. Marianne eats emotion for breakfast. If you want to beat them, follow the money. But be careful. They have had a 7-year head start." He dropped the cigarette butt into a half-empty water glass on the shelf and walked out, leaving me alone in the scent of lavender and stale smoke. I did not contest the will that day. I did not scream at Marianne when she came home. I played the part of the beaten dog. I told her I was processing and would be staying at the local inn for a few days before returning to Boston. But the next morning, I hired Renee Calder. Renee was a probate attorney who operated out of a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. She was young, sharp, and hungry, and most importantly, she was not part of the Hartwell and Sloane Country Club set. She was skeptical at first. "Everyone says they were cheated," she told me, leaning back in her creaking chair. "Usually, the dad just liked the other kid better." Then I showed her the signature on the advancement agreement. "Look at the pen pressure," I said, pointing to the photocopy. The forger pressed hard on the downstroke of the P. I lift my pen there and look at the date. August 14th. I dug up my old credit card statements from 2016. I slid a printout across her desk. On August 14th, 2016, I swiped my card at a coffee shop in Chicago at 8 in the morning and again at a grocery store in Chicago at 6 in the evening. I was physically 700 miles away from this notary in Greyhaven. Renee looked at the credit card statement, then at the signature. She sat up straight. "Okay," she said, "that is interesting. I do not want to file a lawsuit yet." I said, "That alerts them. I want to file for a formal accounting. I want to see every transaction in and out of the estate for the last 7 years." Renee nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "We can do that. If there is fraud, we will find it. But Lucy, if they forged this, they are dangerous. This is not just a family spat. This is a felony." "I know," I said, that night, back in my hotel room. I sat in the glow of my laptop. I could not sleep. Elliot's words kept echoing in my head. Money moving out. 7-year head start. If they said I received $480,000 in 2016, that money had to go somewhere. They couldn't just write a check to Lucy Phillips if I never cashed it, unless they became me. I opened a browser and went to my old email account, the one I had used in college and abandoned shortly after. It was filled with thousands of spam messages. I searched for bank, account, confirmation. Nothing. Then I searched for the date, August 2016. Buried on page 50 of the search results, in the trash folder or spam filter of history, was a notification. "Welcome to Crestbridge Bank. Your new premier checking account is ready." The date was August 15th, 2016. One day after the alleged signature, my heart hammered against my throat. I clicked the email. It was a standard welcome message. "Dear Lucy Phillips, thank you for opening your account ending in 4492. I had never banked at Crestbridge. I searched for the next email from Crestbridge. August 18th, 2016. Transfer confirmation. Outgoing wire of $480,000 processed." I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my eyes. They had opened an account in my name, funded it with the loan from my father, and then wired the money out 3 days later. The money had touched my name just long enough to create a paper trail, and then it had vanished. I wasn't just disinherited, I was the mule. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the screen. My hands were finally steady. The grief was still there, buried deep. But on top of it was something else, a cold, hard clarity. They thought I was weak. They thought I would take the $10,000 and run. I closed the laptop. I was not going anywhere. Renee Calder's office did not look like a war room. It looked like what it was, a cramped suite in a strip mall sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a discount vape shop. But as I sat across from her, watching her organize a stack of filings with the precision of a card sharp, I realized this was exactly where the counterattack needed to start, not in the high-ceilinged mahogany libraries of Hartwell and Sloan, where the air smelled of old money and complicity, but here, under the hum of fluorescent lights. "We are going to be boring," Renee said, tapping the edge of the file on her desk. "That is the strategy. We do not file a lawsuit accusing them of fraud. Not yet. That makes you look hysterical and gives them a chance to play the victim. Instead, we file for discovery and a temporary injunction on asset transfers." She slid the paperwork toward me. "We frame it as routine diligence," she continued. "You are a beneficiary. Technically, even if you were cut out, you have standing to request a full accounting of the estate before the final distribution. We argue that because of the complexity of the assets, specifically the alleged advancement, we need to pause everything to ensure the math is right. It is bureaucratic, it is dry, and it will absolutely infuriate them." I read the motion. It was beautifully dull. It asked for bank statements, tax returns, and verification of the 2016 transfer. It was a request for paperwork, not a declaration of war. "File it," I said. Renee nodded. "I will have a courier run it over to the courthouse within the hour. By 2 o'clock. Hartwell and Sloan will know we are not going away." I left her office and sat in my rental car, the engine idling. I had the legal strategy in motion, but I needed my own answers. The email I had found the night before, the one confirming the opening of a Crestbridge bank account in my name, was burning a hole in my pocket. I drove to the nearest branch of Crestbridge. It was a sleek glass building on the edge of town, the kind of place that offered lattes in the lobby to distract you from their overdraft fees. I sat down with a personal banker, a young man named Kevin who looked about 12 years old. I handed him my driver's license and my social security card. "I need to access an old account," I said. "It was closed in 2016. But I need the opening documents and the signature card." Kevin typed on his keyboard. Frowning, "I am not seeing anything active. Ms. Phillips, it is closed." I repeated, "Look in the archives." He tapped a few more keys. "Ah, here it is. Premier checking. Opened August 15th, 2016. Closed August 18th, 2016. Short life for an account," I said, keeping my voice light. "Can you print the profile?" I seem to have lost my records. Kevin printed a few pages and slid them across the desk. I looked at the header. Name, Lucy Phillips. Social security number, mine. Current address, my old apartment in Chicago. But then my eyes dropped to the contact information. Phone number, 555-0129. The air in the bank seemed to drop 10 degrees. I knew that number. I had dialed it thousands of times in high school and college. It was Ava's old cell phone number, the one she had used until she upgraded 2 years ago. "Thank you." "Kevin," I said, standing up, "that is all I needed." I walked out into the sunlight, my hands trembling with a rage that felt cold and sharp. This wasn't just a forgery by my father or a desperate move by Marianne. Ava was involved. My little sister, who played the role of the innocent, artistic soul who just wanted everyone to get along, had been the contact point for the account that stole my identity. She had been 24 years old in 2016, old enough to know better, old enough to go to jail. I drove straight to the lake house. Technically, it belonged to Ava now, but she was staying at the main estate with Marianne. I knew she would be there in the afternoons. She had mentioned she was cataloging the contents for insurance purposes. I found her on the back deck, overlooking the water. She was wrapped in a cashmere shawl, holding a glass of white wine, looking out at the gray waves of the lake. It was a picturesque scene of morning. "Ava," I said. She jumped, spilling a little wine on the deck. "Lucy, you scared me. I did not hear a car. I walked up the steps. I parked on the road." She smiled nervously. "Oh, well, do you want a glass?" "It is a Pinot Grigio. Mom sent over a case. I did not want her wine. I wanted the truth." I pulled the folded bank printout from my purse and dropped it on the small teak table next to her. "What is this?" she asked, looking down. "It is the internal record for a bank account opened in my name 7 years ago." I said, "The one that received $480,000. Ava's face went blank. "I told you, Lucy, I do not know the details of Dad's finances. That was all him and Mom. Look at the phone number. Ava." She hesitated, then leaned forward. I watched her eyes scan the page. I watched the moment she recognized the digits. Her breath hitched, just for a second, before she sat back, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "So? That is my old number. Why is your phone number on a bank account opened in my name?" I asked. "An account I never opened?" She took a sip of wine, her hand shaking slightly. "I do not know. Maybe Dad used it? He was always losing his phone. He probably just put mine down as a backup." "Do not lie to me," I said, my voice low. "Dad did not use your cell phone number as a backup for a secret account. He had an executive assistant and a lawyer for that. That number was used for two-factor authentication. Ava, that means when the money was moved, the confirmation code went to your phone." Ava stood up, her face flushing pink. "You are crazy. You come here 3 days after the funeral and start interrogating me?" "I am not interrogating you. I am giving you a chance to explain before I give this to my lawyer." That was the trigger. The mention of a lawyer shattered her fragile composure. "You are always like this," she shouted, throwing her hands up, "always making everything about money. Dad is barely in the ground, and you are hunting for typos on bank forms. Do you have any idea how greedy you look?" The accusation hit me in the chest. It was the same line they had used since I was 16. Lucy cares too much about the cost of things. Lucy is transactional. I care about the truth. I said, "No, you do not." She spat back. "You care about what you think you are owed. You left, Lucy. You walked away, and now that there is a check to be cashed, you are back, tearing everyone apart. Dad helped you out years ago, and now you are trying to double dip. It is disgusting. She was good. She was so good that for a second, I felt the old shame curling in my gut. But then I looked at the bank paper again. Did you spend it? I asked. The $480,000? Did you buy a car? Or did it go to Marianne? Get out, Ava hissed. Get off my property. I picked up the paper. I am leaving. I said, but Ava, if you signed anything, if you authorized that transfer, Marianne cannot protect you. This is fraud. I walked away. She didn't call me back. She just stood there, clutching her wine glass like a shield. I returned to my hotel room and called Renee. We have a link, I said. Ava's phone number was on the account. That is good, Renee said. That connects the conspiracy, but we need to know where the money went. It left Crestbridge 3 days later. Where did it land? I am working on it, I said. I spent the next 6 hours diving into the rabbit hole of the internet. I had the Crestbridge statement, which showed an outgoing wire to an entity abbreviated as BHF Ops. BHF. I cross-referenced it with the family's known associates. Nothing. Then I remembered Elliot Crane's whisper in my old bedroom. Bright Hollow Foundation. I searched the public tax filings for the Bright Hollow Foundation. It was a 501c3, registered in New York. The stated mission was supporting the arts and educational initiatives in the Hudson Valley. The board of directors listed 3 people, Marianne Phillips, Ava Phillips, and Graham Pell. I pulled the Form 990 tax returns for 2016. There it was. In August 2016, the foundation received a generic donation of $480,000 from an anonymous donor, and then, looking at the expenses for that year, the picture became clear. The foundation had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants, but the recipients weren't schools or museums. One grant for $60,000 went to Villano Interiors, the firm that had renovated the lake house. Another grant for $40,000 went to Global Experiential Travel, a luxury travel agency. They were washing their lifestyle through the charity. My inheritance hadn't just been stolen. It had been used to pay for new curtains and first-class flights to Italy. I needed to talk to the third name on that list, Graham Pell. Graham had been my father's financial advisor for 20 years. He was the one who managed the portfolios, the one who supposedly oversaw the compliance. If money was moving like this, Graham knew. But when I searched for him, I found that he was no longer with the firm in Greyhaven. His LinkedIn profile was deleted. His professional website was a dead link. I dug deeper, using the skip tracing tools I had access to through my forensic license. I found a residential address for a Graham Pell in Westfall City, 2 hours south. It was an apartment complex in a working-class neighborhood, a far cry from the gated community he used to live in. I drove to Westfall the next morning. The apartment building was a brick block from the 70s, smelling of damp carpet and cooked cabbage. I found Unit 4B and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Harder. Graham? It is Lucy Phillips. I heard movement inside. A latch clicked, and the door opened 2 inches, held by a chain. Graham Pell peered out. He looked terrible. He had lost 30 pounds. His skin was sallow, and he hadn't shaved in days. He was wearing a stained t-shirt. Lucy? He whispered. Open the door. Graham, you shouldn't be here, he said, his eyes darting to the hallway behind me. I know about Bright Hollow, I said. I know about the $480,000 wired from the fake account. His face went gray. Go away. Lucy, please, I am not going away. They cut me out of the will. Graham, they said I took that money. I need you to tell me the truth. He started to close the door. I put my boot in the jamb. Graham, I said, if you do not talk to me, I list you as a co-conspirator in the lawsuit I'm filing on Monday. Do you want to go to prison for them? Marianne is not going to visit you. He stopped pushing. He looked at me, and I saw genuine terror in his eyes. "It is not just the money. Lucy," he hissed through the crack, "you do not understand what they have done. Tell me." He shook his head frantically. "I cannot. They made me sign. Look, just leave it alone. Walk away. You are the lucky one. You got out." "What does that mean?" He pulled the door hard, forcing my foot back. "Just check the guarantees. Lucy, check the old guarantees." He slammed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood there in the dim hallway, my heart racing. Check the old guarantees. I drove back to Greyhaven with a pit in my stomach. What did he mean? I called Renee from the car. "What is a guarantee?" I asked. In the context of the family business, Renee's voice was serious. "A personal guarantee is when an individual pledges their own assets to secure a business loan. If the business cannot pay, the bank comes after the person. Why?" Graham Pell told me to check them. I arrived at Renee's office an hour later. She had pulled the UCC filings, public records of liens and secured debts. She laid a document on the desk. "Here," she said, "this is a filing from 2014, a revolving line of credit for Phillips Meridian Holdings, $2 million. I looked at the signature page. My father had signed as the primary borrower, but there, listed as a validity guarantor, was my name. I stared at the signature. This one was real. I remembered it instantly. I was 24. I had just finished my master's. I was visiting home for the weekend. My father had come into the kitchen, looking stressed, holding a stack of papers. "Luce, honey, I need a favor," he had said. "The bank is being a pain about this renewal. They want a secondary signature just for the file because you are on the board technically. It is meaningless. Just a formality so we can make payroll next week." I had trusted him. I had signed the paper on the granite island while eating a bagel, barely reading the fine print. I looked at Renee. "Is this still active?" She nodded slowly. "It is a revolving line. It renews automatically unless you formally withdraw the guarantee. And Lucy, the line is maxed out." "What does that mean?" "It means Phillips Meridian owes the bank $2 million, and since your father is dead, and the estate is in probate, if the company defaults, the bank does not have to wait for the estate to settle. They can come after the guarantor." Me. I felt the room spin. Cutting me out of the estate wasn't just about greed. It was a setup. They had taken the assets, the houses, the cash, the investments, and given them to Ava. But they had left me attached to the debt. If the business failed, which seemed likely given the way they were draining cash, Ava would walk away with the clean assets, and I would be on the hook for $2 million. I would be bankrupt. They didn't just want to leave me with nothing. They wanted to bury me. "I need a forensic accountant." I said, "Not me. I am too close to it. I need a firm that scares people." Renee nodded. "I know a group. Sable Ridge Consulting. They are expensive, but they are sharks. Hire them," I said. "But Lucy," Renee warned, "they cost $500 an hour. You said you have savings." "But I have $80,000 in a retirement account." I said, "I will liquidate it. That is your future." "Lucy." "No," I said, looking at the signature that was about to destroy my life. "This is my future if we do not kill this." I hired Sable Ridge the next day. I wired them a $25,000 retainer. Watching a third of my life savings vanish in a single click, it made me nauseous. But I had no choice. I met with the lead investigator, a woman named Sarah, who wore a sharp blazer and had zero sense of humor. I gave her everything: the fake bank account, the charity tax returns, the guarantor documents. Find where the money is going. I told her, Marianne is moving it somewhere. The charity is just a pass-through. 3 days passed. I stayed in my hotel room, barely eating, waiting. Finally, Sarah called me. "We found a pattern," she said. Her voice was crisp over the phone. "Tell me." Bright Hollow Foundation pays a monthly consulting fee to a vendor called Lake Glass Strategies, $5,000 a month, going back 6 years. Plus large, ad hoc payments for strategic planning. "Who owns Lake Glass?" I asked. "It is a shell," Sarah said. "Registered in Delaware. Agent is a generic service. but we traced the mailing address for their invoices. And it goes to a private mailbox store in a strip mall in Albany, Box 404. Okay, I said. We ran a search on that box number. It is also the registered address for a dormant LLC called M-Fi Design. M-Fi, Marianne Phillips. She was siphoning money out of the family business, through the charity, and into a shell company she controlled. She was looting the estate before probate even closed. I have enough, I said. I have enough to go to the judge. Not yet, Sarah said. You have a thread. We need the whole rope. We need to know where Lake Glass banks. We are working on a subpoena. I hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction. I had them. But the victory was short-lived. That afternoon, the front desk called. There was a courier with a letter for me. I went down to the lobby. The courier handed me a thick red envelope. Urgent, legal material. I tore it open. It was on the letterhead of the bank that held the Phillips Meridian credit line. Dear Ms. Phillips, notice of debt restructuring and reaffirmation of guarantee. I scanned the legalese. The bank had been notified of my father's death. Because of the change in leadership, they were calling the loan, demanding immediate repayment of the $2.1 million, unless the guarantor reaffirmed the obligation and posted additional collateral. Failure to execute the attached reaffirmation agreement within 72 hours will result in an immediate default event and the commencement of collection proceedings against the guarantor. I stared at the paper. They had timed this. Marianne knew the bank would call the loan when they found out about Dad. She had likely triggered it herself by notifying them. She was forcing my hand. If I didn't sign this reaffirmation, the bank would sue me for $2 million I didn't have. But if I did sign it, I was locking myself into a debt that was being serviced by a company she was actively looting. I looked at the clock on the lobby wall. The countdown had started. I had 72 hours to figure out how to escape a trap that had been set for me 9 years ago. I walked out to my car. The letter crushed in my hand. The air outside was cool, smelling of rain. 72 hours. I took out my phone and dialed Renee. They made a move. I said, "What is it?" "The bank. They are calling the note. They want me to reaffirm the guarantee or they sue." There was a silence on the line. Then Renee swore. A short, sharp sound. "Lucy, do not sign that document. If I do not, they sue me. If you do, you are signing your own death warrant. Marianne is stealing the money that would pay that loan. I know." I said, "I need to find a way out of the guarantee. There has to be a loophole." "Graham Pell," I said suddenly. "What?" "Graham Pell told me to check the guarantees. He knew this was coming. He knew there was something wrong with them. He refused to talk to you. He was scared." I said, "But now I am scared too. And that makes us equal." I hung up. I started the car. I wasn't going to ask Graham nicely this time. I was going to Westfall, and I wasn't leaving until he told me how to break the trap. The 72-hour clock was ticking, a silent countdown in the back of my mind that made every heartbeat feel a little faster. The bank wanted me to reaffirm a debt of $2 million. If I signed, I was tethered to a sinking ship captained by people who were actively drilling holes in the hull. If I refused, the bank would sue me, seizing my assets and garnishing the wages of a forensic accountant who was supposed to be the picture of financial propriety. I sat in Renee Calder's office. The letter from the bank smoothed out on the cheap laminate desk between us. "Do not sign it," Renee said. Her voice was firm, lacking the hesitation I felt. "If you sign that reaffirmation, you validate the original debt. You lose the ability to claim you were defrauded later. If I do not sign it, they sue me on Tuesday." I said, "Let them try." Renee said, "We are going to throw a wrench in their gears before Tuesday comes." She pulled a fresh legal pad toward her. "We file a formal dispute with Crestbridge regarding the original account opening in 2016, she said. "We attach the affidavit stating you never opened the account, the proof of your residence in Chicago, and the fact that the contact number belonged to a third party." "How does that help with the guarantee?" I asked. "It triggers a compliance freeze," Renee explained. "Banks are terrified of federal regulators. If there is a credible claim of identity theft involving their institution, they have to pause related collection activities to investigate. It buys us time. And more importantly, it forces the bank to look at the Phillips family not as grieving clients, but as potential risks. I looked at the document. It was a gamble. It was declaring open war. "Do it," I said. "File it." Renee typed the notice, her keystrokes sharp and rhythmic. We faxed it to the bank's legal department and sent hard copies via overnight courier. The reaction was almost immediate, but it didn't come from the bank. It came from the estate. 6 hours after we filed the dispute, my phone rang. The screen displayed Marianne Phillips. I stared at it. I had not spoken to my stepmother since the reading of the will. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. I answered on the third try. "Hello, Marianne, Lucy," she breathed. Her voice was thick, wet with tears. It was a performance I had heard 1,000 times. When she wanted a new car, when she wanted to change vacation plans, when she wanted my father to side with her against me. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "You have to stop this," she sobbed. "The bank called us. They are freezing the operating accounts because of some fraud alert you filed. Lucy, you are going to kill the business. You are going to kill your sister. Ava is 31. I said, "She is not a child. She is fragile," Marianne cried. "She cannot handle this stress. She has been throwing up all morning. Do you hate us that much? Your father is barely cold and you are trying to burn down everything he built. I did not burn it down. Marianne, someone stole my identity to launder money through a charity. I am just correcting the record." There was a pause. The sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold, transactional silence. Then, the tears returned. Softer this time. "Lucy, listen to me. I know you are hurt. I know you feel left out. I want to make it right." I waited. "I can get access to some liquidity," she said. "From my personal savings. I can wire you $250,000 today. Cash, no taxes. $250,000. It was $250,000. It was enough to pay off my student loans, buy a condo, and walk away. Just withdraw the motions," Marianne whispered. "Sign the reaffirmation for the bank so they release the accounts. And then just go back to Boston. Let us mourn in peace. $250,000. Lucy, it is what your father would have wanted." For a second, just a split second, I wavered. The exhaustion of the last week crashed over me. The fear of the $2 million lawsuit was a physical weight on my shoulders. I could take the money. I could leave this toxic, rot-filled town and never look back. But then I remembered the yoga mats in my bedroom. I remembered the wellness office. I remembered the way they had erased me. And I realized something else. Marianne never offered money unless she was terrified. If she was offering $250,000, it meant she was hiding something worth 10 times that amount. "This isn't about peace, Marianne." I said, "This is about hush money. It is an inheritance," she insisted, her voice rising. "It is me being generous." "No," I said, "it is a bribe, and it tells me I am right over the target." I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I had broken the pattern. For the first time in my life, I hadn't folded when she cried. I needed to press the advantage. I called Graham Pell. He didn't answer. But I texted him. "I filed a fraud report with the bank. The investigation starts tomorrow. They will subpoena the foundation records. Meet me, or explain it to the feds." He replied in 3 minutes. "The Bluebird Diner, 11 a.m. Come alone." The Bluebird was a chrome and neon relic on the outskirts of Westfall, crowded with truckers and locals. It was loud, smelling of bacon grease and burnt coffee, perfect for a conversation that needed to be unheard. Graham was sitting in a back booth, huddled over a mug of black coffee. He looked even worse than he had at his apartment. His eyes were darting around the room, checking every person who walked through the door. I slid into the booth opposite him. "You look like hell." "Graham?" I said. He flinched. "Keep your voice down. Tell me about the safe deposit box," I said. Skipping the pleasantries, "You mentioned it when I was at your door." Graham took a sip of coffee, his hand trembling. Your father. He knew things were getting bad. About 2 years ago. The business was cash poor. But Marianne kept spending. The renovations, the trips. She was draining the liquidity faster than we could generate it. Why didn't you stop her? You were the advisor. He let out a short, bitter laugh. Have you ever tried to stop Marianne? She threatened to fire the firm. She threatened to sue me for mismanagement if I didn't authorize the transfers. I have a mortgage. Lucy, I have kids in college. I caved. Cowardice. I thought, but a relatable kind. So what happened? Your dad started to get suspicious, Graham said. He saw the shrinking margins. He asked me for reports. Real reports. Not the ones Marianne doctored. And did you give them to him? I tried, Graham whispered, but Marianne intercepted them. She told him his mind was going, that he was confused, that he couldn't read the spreadsheets correctly. Gaslighting. They had done it to him, too. So he opened a box. Graham said, at Crestbridge, a private safe deposit box. He told me he was putting his insurance policy in there. Documents. Proof. He said if anything happened to him, or if the money ran out, the box would explain it. Where is the key? I asked. Graham shook his head. I do not know, but here is the kicker. Lucy, the box had a secondary authorization. Not Ava. Marianne would never let Ava near anything real. Who? Marianne, Graham said, but she doesn't know she has access. What does that mean? Your dad set it up so that in the event of his death, the executor could access it, but he never told her the box existed. He thought he would outlive her, or that he would have time to expose her. He was wrong. I sat back. So there is a box at Crestbridge, full of evidence, that Marianne doesn't know about, but has the legal right to open? Technically, Graham said, but since you are contesting the will and the executorship is in limbo, you can petition the court for a specialized inspection. If you can prove probable cause, I have probable cause. I said, I have a forged signature and a stolen identity. Graham leaned forward. Be careful. Lucy, if that box contains what I think it contains, it destroys the narrative. It proves your dad wasn't senile. It proves he was scared. Why are you telling me this now? Graham looked down at his coffee. Because I am tired of being afraid, and because he was a good man. Lucy, before she got her hooks into him, he was a good man. I left the diner and drove straight to Renee's office. We drafted the petition that afternoon. Emergency motion for discovery and preservation of evidence. We argued that the deceased maintained a safe deposit box unknown to the primary beneficiary, and given the allegations of fraud regarding the estate's assets, the contents needed to be catalogued by a court-appointed officer immediately, the judge, perhaps sensing the mess this case was becoming. Granted the motion the next morning, but he put a condition on it. The box would be opened in the presence of a bank officer, my attorney, and the estate's attorney. Marianne would be notified. The showdown was set for Thursday at Crestbridge Bank. The vault room was cool and quiet, lined with walls of stainless steel drawers. I stood with Renee. Marianne stood with Mr. Sloane. She refused to look at me. Her face was a mask of cold fury. The bank manager slid the long, narrow drawer out of the wall and carried it to a table. We are looking for financial instruments or testamentary documents. Mr. Sloane said stiffly, anything personal remains private. Renee nodded, agreed. The manager opened the lid. Inside, there was no jewelry, no stacks of cash, just a thick manila envelope. The manager lifted it out. It was unsealed. He poured the contents onto the table. 2 documents. The first was a document I recognized instantly. It was the Family Advancement Agreement, the same document Mr. Sloane had shown me at the will reading. But wait, Renee said, leaning in. Look at the margins. I looked close. On the version filed with the court, the one that disinherited me, there were initials on the bottom right corner of every page. LP and RP, Lucy Phillips and Robert Phillips. On this copy, the initials were different. They were RP and RP, Robert Phillips and Robert Phillips. Dad had initialed both spots? No, Renee said. Look at the ink. She pointed. The RP in the guarantor spot was shaky. Written in blue ballpoint, the RP in the beneficiary spot, where my initials should have been, was written in black gel pen. It was a draft, Renee said. A draft he was reviewing. He initialed his own sections, maybe absent-mindedly initialed the other line while reading. But look at the signature page. I said. The signature page was blank. My father had a copy of the agreement in his box, unsigned, which meant the signed version Marianne produced, the one with my signature on it, was created later. Why would he keep an unsigned draft in a safe deposit box? Mr. Sloane asked. His brow furrowed. This proves nothing. Read the note, I said. I pointed to the second piece of paper. It was a sheet of yellow legal pad, folded into a square. The bank manager unfolded it with gloved hands. It was my father's handwriting. I knew that scrawl better than my own. The loops were large, the pressure uneven. If this goes missing, it means I was right about The silence in the vault was absolute. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a ledger. It was something far worse. It was a voice from the grave, confirming that the man we were all fighting over had lived his final years in terror of his own wife. Marianne made a sound, a choked, strangulated gasp. She reached for the note. Do not touch it, Renee snapped. That is evidence. Marianne's hand hovered in the air. Her composure cracked. The mask fell away, and for the first time, I saw the panic underneath. She wasn't grieving. She was cornered. He was sick. She hissed. He was paranoid. The dementia. The medical records do not show dementia. Marianne, I said quietly. They show heart failure. His mind was fine. I stared at the note. It means I was right about M. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and stinging. I had spent the last week treating my father as a data point, a signature to be verified, a bank account to be audited. I had been so focused on the forensic accounting of his betrayal that I hadn't let myself feel the tragedy of his reality. He had been alone. He had been trapped in that big, beautiful house with a woman who was slowly dismantling his life, and he had been too proud, or too scared, to call me. He had tried to leave a trail. This box, this note. It was a message to me. I turned away from the table, my chest heaving. I walked to the corner of the vault, pressing my forehead against the cold steel of the wall. Lucy, Renee said softly, coming up behind me. I cannot do this, I whispered. I am turning him into a case file. He was my dad, and he left you this breadcrumb, Renee said, because he knew you were the only one smart enough to follow it. Loving him and seeking the truth are not opposites. Lucy, they are the same thing. You are the only one fighting for him. I took a deep breath. I wiped my face. I turned back to the table. We want certified copies of everything. I told the manager, and the originals stay in the custody of the court. Marianne glared at me, but she didn't say a word. She knew the ground had shifted. The unsigned draft proved the advancement was, at best, a contested document. The note proved duress. We walked out of the bank into the bright midday sun. I felt exhausted, but lighter. The truth was ugly, but it was there. That evening, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the hotel, eating a sandwich I couldn't taste. When a knock came on the window, it was Ava. She was wearing a hoodie and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup. She looked younger, stripped of the heiress costume she usually wore. I rolled down the window. You are going to ruin us, aren't you? She asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was resigned. I am not ruining anything. Ava, I am exposing what is already ruined. She leaned against the car door. The bank called me today about the identity theft claim. They wanted to know if I recognized the phone number on the account. What did you tell them? She looked at her sneakers. I told them I did not recall. I sighed. Ava, perjury is a felony. I know, she snapped, tears filling her eyes. I know, okay? But what am I supposed to do? Mom is pacing the house like a caged tiger. She says you are vindictive. She says if I talk to you, I am betraying the family. You are betraying yourself. I said, Ava, Look at me. She looked up. Did you know about the guarantor trap? I asked. Did you know that by taking the inheritance, I would be left with a $2 million debt? Her face crumpled. No, I swear to God. Lucy, I didn't know about the debt. Mom just said. She said the business was complicated. She said we needed to protect the assets from your instability. She told me to sign things. What things? Resolutions? Banking forms? I don't know. She puts a pile in front of me and says, "Sign here so we can keep the lights on." So I sign. I looked at her. She wasn't a villain. She was a pawn, a useful idiot. But ignorance wasn't a defense when millions of dollars were missing. Ava, I said gently, if you want to survive this, you need to stop signing. I can't, she whispered. She controls everything. My allowance, the house, the car. I have nothing. Lucy, I have never had a job. I don't know how to do anything. That was the tragedy of Ava. Marianne had crippled her with luxury. She had raised a bird with clipped wings so it could never fly away. Then you better start learning. I said, because the money is gone. She looked at me, terrified. What do you mean? I mean, Marianne has been draining it for years. Why do you think she offered me $250,000 to go away? She is trying to buy time to hide the rest. Ava stepped back from the car. She looks at me with a mix of fear and dawning horror. If I help you, she asked, her voice trembling, will you still hate me? I looked at my sister. I saw the 20 years of manipulation she had endured, the golden cage she lived in. I don't know yet, I said honestly. She nodded, wiped her nose on her sleeve, and walked away into the darkness. I watched her go. I wanted to save her, but I couldn't save someone who was still holding the hand of the person drowning them. My phone buzzed. It was Sarah from Sable Ridge Consulting. Lucy, Sarah said. Her voice was electric. We got the subpoena returns on Lake Glass Strategies. Tell me. I said, we traced the money, the consulting fees, the charity wash. It all flows into Lake Glass, and Lake Glass is buying real estate. Where? All over the state. Small commercial properties. Rentals. But here's the thing. They are not titling them in Marianne's name. Who are they titled to? Variations of the family names. Some to Ava, some to shell companies, but we found one in Merrill County, a duplex, purchased 4 years ago for $300,000. Cash. Okay. I said, who owns it? You do. Sarah said. I froze. What? The deed is in the name of Lucy Phillips, Sarah said, but the tax bills are being mailed to Marianne's private box. I own a duplex in Merrill County? According to the county recorder, yes, you have been a landlord for 4 years. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just the one bank account. It wasn't just the one loan. Marianne had been building a shadow empire using my name. I was the safety valve. If the IRS came looking, the assets belonged to Lucy. If the creditors came looking, the debt belonged to Lucy. I was the scapegoat for the entire operation. Send me the address. I said. I hung up. Merrill County was 3 hours away, a rural, forgotten part of the state. I looked at the map on my phone. I wasn't going back to Boston. I wasn't going back to the hotel. I was going to see my property. I started the engine. The anger that had been burning in me for a week shifted into something colder, something harder. They hadn't just stolen my past. They had mortgaged my future. And now, I was coming to foreclose. Merrill County was not the Hudson Valley. It was a place where the highway narrowed into 2 lanes, winding through towns that had seen their best days 30 years ago. The landscape here was stripped of the manicured pretension of Greyhaven. There were no stone walls or wrought iron gates, just chain-link fences and houses with siding that had begun to chalk in the sun. I pulled my rental car up to the address Sarah from Sable Ridge had given me. It was a duplex, a boxy structure painted a fading beige, with a shared porch and 2 mailboxes nailed to the railing. I sat in the car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. According to the deed recorded in the county courthouse, I owned this building. I had bought it 4 years ago for $300,000, cash. I stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. A tricycle sat in the middle of the left-hand driveway. A potted fern, dead and brown, hung from the porch roof. This was the asset Marianne was hiding. It wasn't a secret offshore account or a diamond necklace. It was a rental property in a working-class town, generating passive income that flowed directly into her pocket while the liability, the property taxes, the insurance, the potential slip-and-fall lawsuits, rested on my shoulders. I walked up the steps and knocked on the door labeled Unit A. After a moment, the door opened. A woman in her 50s stood there, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked tired, wearing a nursing scrub top. "Can I help you?" she asked, eyeing my blazer with suspicion. "We do not want any solar panels. I am not selling anything." I said, "My name is Lucy Phillips." The woman's face changed instantly. "Oh, Ms. Phillips, we did not know you were coming." She knew my name. Of course she did. It was on her lease. "I am sorry to intrude," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I am just checking on the property. I have been away." She opened the door wider. "Well, come in. I hope this is not about the water heater. I told the management company it is still making that clanking noise." I stepped into the living room. It was clean, smelling of lemon polish and stale cooking oil. Family photos covered the walls. "Who is the management company?" I asked. "Lake Glass," she said. "I send the check to the P.O. box in Albany every month. Like clockwork. $1,200. $1,200 a month. $14,400 a year." And there were 2 units. Marianne was pulling nearly $30,000 a year out of this building, tax-free, while I was legally responsible for every pipe that burst. I looked at the woman. Her name was Mrs. Gable. I saw it on a piece of mail on the side table. She was a nurse. She worked hard to pay rent to a shell company that was stealing from her landlord. "Is everything else okay?" Mrs. Gable asked, looking nervous. "You are not selling, are you?" "My grandson goes to the school down the block. It took us a long time to find a place this steady." I looked at her anxious face. I could have evicted her. I could have told her that her lease was void because it was signed by a fraudster. I could have demanded the back rent that Marianne had stolen, but that was what Marianne would do. Marianne viewed people as collateral damage. I refused to play by her rules. "No, Mrs. Gable," I said firmly, "I am not selling, and you are not moving. I just needed to verify the condition of the building." She exhaled, a visible release of tension. "Oh, thank God. You hear so many stories these days. I will have someone look at the water heater." I promised. I walked out of the duplex 10 minutes later, shaking with a quiet, cold rage. I met the property manager, a local handyman named Frank who lived 3 streets over. He showed me his contract. It was signed by Lucy Phillips. He had never met me. He dealt with my assistant, a woman who sounded remarkably like Marianne on the phone. I didn't fire him. I told him there would be some administrative changes coming. But to keep doing his job, I wasn't going to punish the people who were keeping the roof from leaking. I drove back to Greyhaven with the lease agreement in my passenger seat. Marianne wasn't just a thief. She was a parasite. She had attached herself to my identity, feeding off my credit score and my clean record, using me as a shield to build her own safety net. I went straight to Renee Calder's office. Renee looked at the lease. She looked at the deed copy I had pulled from the recorder's office. "This is a RICO case waiting to happen," Renee said, her voice low. "Interstate wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering. Lucy, if we turn this over to the district attorney, Marianne goes to prison." "I know," I said, "but if we go criminal now, the assets get frozen by the government. The feds will seize everything, the company, the accounts, the properties. It could take 10 years to get restitution. I need to get the money back first. Then I will hand her to the feds." Renee nodded. "Strategic. Okay. Then we ramp up the pressure in probate." She filed an emergency motion that afternoon. Motion to suspend estate distributions, pending authentication of documents. We argued that the discovery of the duplex, titled in my name without my knowledge, created a presumption of broad-spectrum document fraud. We argued that the advancement agreement, the document that cut me out of the will, was fruit of the poisonous tree. The judge ordered a forensic handwriting analysis. 3 days later, we were back in the conference room at Hartwell and Sloan. The air was thick with tension. Marianne sat at the far end of the table, looking pale but defiant. Ava was absent. The expert, a court-appointed specialist named Dr. Aris, projected an image of the signature onto the screen. He placed my known signature, from my driver's license and tax returns, next to the signature on the advancement agreement. As you can see, Dr. Aris said, pointing a laser at the screen, the static alignment is nearly perfect, too perfect. No person signs their name exactly the same way twice. There are always microscopic variations in pressure and spacing. He clicked to the next slide, which showed the two signatures overlaid. They matched perfectly. This indicates a simulation. Dr. Aris concluded. It is likely a trace or a digital transfer of a genuine signature onto this document. It is not an original wet ink signature executed on the date in question. The room was silent. This was the smoking gun. Mr. Sloan, Marianne's attorney, didn't flinch. He adjusted his cufflinks and looked at the judge, who was presiding via video conference. Your Honor, Mr. Sloan said smoothly, Dr. Aris's testimony is fascinating, but it misses the context. Ms. Phillips has a history of financial instability. We have witness testimony suggesting she signed this document under duress and was highly emotional at the time, which could account for pressure variations. Furthermore, she accepted the $480,000. You cannot accept the benefit of a contract and then claim the signature is fake. It was a lie, a bold, flat-out lie, but it gave them a foothold. The judge hesitated. The expert says it is a simulation. Mr. Sloan, it is an opinion, Your Honor. Mr. Sloan countered, and we have the bank records showing the money went to an account in her name. If she gave her login credentials to a family member to manage the funds, that is her negligence, not fraud. The judge rubbed his temples. I am ordering a full evidentiary hearing. Until then, the estate is frozen, but I am not removing the executrix yet. The burden of proof is high. We walked out of the meeting with a partial victory, but the war was shifting fronts. Marianne knew she couldn't win on the facts, so she decided to destroy the witness. The smear campaign began 48 hours later. It started with whispers. I walked into the local coffee shop, the place where I used to study calculus in high school, and the conversation stopped. The barista, a girl I had gone to camp with, wouldn't meet my eyes. I heard the rumors from Renee, who heard them from the court clerks. The story Marianne was spinning was masterful. She wasn't saying I was a criminal. She was saying I was troubled. Lucy had a breakdown in Chicago. Lucy has a gambling problem. Lucy came back because she is broke and is trying to shake down her grieving sister. It was the oldest weapon in the arsenal against women who ask for what is theirs. Call them crazy. Call them emotional. Call them greedy. I was at the grocery store when I ran into Mrs. Higgins, my old piano teacher. Hello, Mrs. Higgins, I said, smiling. She looked at me with deep, pitying concern. Oh, Lucy, Marianne told us about your struggles. I am praying for you. Dear, it is so brave of you to show your face. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. The shame was a physical reflex, a conditioned response from childhood. Don't make a scene. Don't be difficult. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I was a forensic accountant, that I made 6 figures, that I was the only honest person in my family, but I didn't. Thank you. Mrs. Higgins, I said coldly, I am doing just fine. I walked away. I realized then that I couldn't win the court of public opinion. Marianne had lived here for 30 years. She hosted the charity galas. She sat on the library board. I was the outsider. I had to win in the ledger. I went back to the hotel and called Sarah at Sable Ridge. Forget the duplex. I said, follow the Bright Hollow money. The charity. Where did the grants go? We are tracing it, Sarah said. We found a large block of payments in 2018 and 2019, totaling $60,000. Who was the recipient? The Archer Academy of Fine Arts, Sarah said, in Manhattan. I closed my eyes. The Archer Academy was a pay-to-play art school. It was where Ava had gone for her postgraduate residency. So the charity paid for Ava's art school? I asked. That is self-dealing, but it is small potatoes. Wait, Sarah said. We subpoenaed the Academy's vendor list. They paid a consulting fee back to Lake Glass Strategies. Explain. Bright Hollow Foundation donated $60,000 to the Academy for a scholarship, Sarah explained. 2 weeks later, the Academy hired Lake Glass Strategies, Marianne's shell company, for curriculum consulting. The fee was $50,000. My jaw tightened. It was a kickback loop. Marianne used the charity to pay for Ava's vanity education, but she required the school to kick 80% of the money back to her private shell company. Ava wasn't just a beneficiary, she was the mechanism. I needed to talk to my sister. I didn't call her. I waited for her. I knew Ava's routine. When she was stressed, she went to the pier at the edge of the lake. It was where we used to hide from our parents when they fought. I found her there at sunset. The wind was whipping off the water, cold and biting. Ava was sitting on the wooden bench, wrapped in a coat that cost more than Mrs. Gable's car. She looked up when I approached. She looked exhausted. Her skin was papery, her eyes shadowed. "You are winning," she said dully. "Mom is screaming at the lawyers all day." I sat down next to her. "I am not winning. Ava, I am just unbearing the truth." She laughed. A brittle sound. "The truth. You love that word." I handed her a folder. "What is this?" she asked. "It is a flow chart," I said, "of your art school tuition." She opened it. She stared at the arrows. Bright Hollow to Archer. Archer to Lake Glass. Mom paid for your school with charity money. I said, and then she made the school kick the money back to her. You were not a student, Ava. You were a laundering vessel. Ava stared at the paper. Her hands started to shake. I didn't know about the kickback, she whispered. I thought she just got me a scholarship. I believed her. Ava was willfully blind. But she wasn't malicious. It doesn't matter if you knew. I said, you signed the scholarship acceptance. You sat on the board of the charity that approved the grant. You are legally liable. Ava, if the IRS looks at this, they do not see a naive daughter. They see a co-conspirator. Ava dropped the folder. She put her head in her hands. She is going to destroy me. Ava sobbed. If I speak up, if I side with you, she will cut me off. She will tell everyone I was in on it. She has files. Lucy, she has files on me too. I looked at the water. I knew Marianne had files. Marianne kept receipts on everyone. I am offering you a choice. Ava, I said. My voice was steady, void of the comfort she wanted. I am not going to hug you. I am not going to tell you it will be okay. I am telling you that the ship is sinking. Marianne is drilling the holes. You can stay on board and drown with her, or you can grab the lifeline I'm throwing you. What is the lifeline? She asked, looking at me with tear-streaked eyes. Truth, I said. Total, unvarnished truth, under oath. She wiped her face. If I help you, if I testify that I didn't open that account, will you still hate me? The question hung in the cold air. It was the question of a child who just wanted to be loved, even after burning the house down. I looked at her. I saw the sister I used to braid hair with. I also saw the woman who had lived in luxury while I scraped by, the woman who had let them paint over my existence. I don't know yet. I said, it was the only honest answer I had. She nodded slowly. Okay. She didn't agree to testify, but she didn't say no. I left her on the pier and drove back to my hotel. I had the emotional leverage, but I needed the legal kill shot. I spent the night with the box of documents Renee had scanned from the original Discovery tranche, the guarantor agreements, the loan documents. I was looking for something Graham Pell had hinted at. Check the old guarantees. I read the boilerplate text. Page after page of standard banking language, default clauses, interest rate adjustments, and then, at 2 a.m, I found it. Section 8. 4. Change of control. In the event that the borrower, Phillips Meridian Holdings, undergoes a change of control, defined as a transfer of more than 50% of the voting equity, the borrower must notify the guarantor in writing within 30 days. I sat up straight. Failure to provide such notice shall render the guarantee voidable at the option of the guarantor. I read it again. My father had owned 100% of the company. When he died, the will transferred 51% of the company to Ava. That was a change of control. The transfer happened the day the will was admitted to probate, preliminarily accepted 2 weeks ago. Had they notified me? I checked my mail. I checked my email. I had received the will. I had received the transition stipend offer, but I had never received a formal notice from the company stating that control had shifted and inquiring if I wished to maintain my guarantee. Marianne had been so focused on hiding the money that she had missed the corporate formalities. She assumed that since she controlled the estate, she controlled the clock, but the clock was ticking on Section 8.4, and they had missed the window. Or rather, they had failed to issue the notice because issuing it would admit that I was a guarantor, which they were trying to hide from me. It was a paradox. To keep me as a guarantor, they had to notify me of the change. To notify me, they had to reveal the liability. They had chosen silence, hoping I wouldn't read the fine print. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the clause. I sent it to Renee. Section 8.4, I typed. They never sent the notice. The guarantee is dead. Renee replied instantly. If that holds, we can blow the financing out of the water. If I voided the guarantee, the bank would lose its security. The loan would be in technical default. The bank would freeze the credit line immediately. Phillips Meridian Holdings went on credit. They used that line to pay vendors, to make payroll, to keep the lights on while they waited for rent checks. If I pulled the pin, the cash flow stopped. It was the nuclear option. It would push the company and the family to a financial cliff. I thought about Mrs. Gable in the duplex. I thought about the employees at the firm who had nothing to do with this. But then I thought about the wellness office. I thought about the forged signature. I thought about the smear campaign calling me unstable. They had tried to bury me in debt. I was just returning the favor. The next morning, Renee and I drafted the notice. Notice of election to void guarantee pursuant to Section 8.4. We cited the transfer of equity to Ava Phillips. We cited the failure to provide notice. We stated, in no uncertain terms, that Lucy Phillips was hereby terminating her obligations as guarantor effective immediately. We sent it to Crestbridge Bank via certified courier. We didn't send a copy to Marianne. We let the bank do it for us. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, the bomb went off. I was sitting in Renee's office when her phone rang. It was the general counsel for Crestbridge. Renee put it on speaker. Ms. Calder, the counsel said. His voice was clipped. We received your notice. We are reviewing the loan agreement. And? Renee asked. And? It appears Ms. Phillips is correct regarding the notice requirement. There was a pause. However, the counsel continued. This creates a significant collateral deficiency for Phillips Meridian Holdings. The loan is now undersecured. That sounds like a problem for the borrower, Renee said. It is, the counsel said. We have placed an administrative freeze on the company's operating accounts and the revolving credit line until this is resolved. No funds move out, no payroll, no vendor payments. Thank you, Renee said. She hung up. I sat back in my chair. It was done. Marianne was currently swiping a company card or trying to cut a check, and it was bouncing. The oxygen had just been sucked out of her world. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. I had forced them to the cliff. Now, I just had to wait and see if they would jump, or if they would finally, for the first time in their lives, surrender. But I knew Marianne. She wouldn't surrender. She would lash out. And now that she had no money to hide behind, she was going to be more dangerous than ever. The silence that followed the credit freeze was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a machine that had suddenly ground to a halt, stripping the gears as it died. When Crestbridge Bank locked the revolving credit line for Phillips Meridian Holdings, the shockwave hit Greyhaven within 24 hours. It started with a declined corporate card at the local lumber yard. Then, the payroll service sent an automated notification to the 40 employees at the firm. Direct deposit failed due to insufficient funds. I sat in my hotel room, watching the fallout through the window of my laptop. Marianne did not hide. She did not apologize. Instead, she went on the offensive. She gave a statement to the Greyhaven Gazette. The headline read, "Local heiress blocks family business, putting jobs at risk." In the article, Marianne was quoted as the devastated widow trying to keep her late husband's legacy alive, while I was painted as the estranged daughter who had returned from the city to hold the company hostage over a personal vendetta. She didn't mention the forgery. She didn't mention the identity theft. She just said I had frozen the accounts, which was technically true. But stripped of all context, it made me look like a monster. My phone rang incessantly with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, likely angry employees or local vendors. I didn't answer. I knew that if I engaged, I would lose. This wasn't a PR battle. It was a siege. Renee Calder came to my hotel room that afternoon. She looked grim. "They are bleeding out," Renee said, dropping her briefcase on the bed. "Without the credit line, they cannot cover the overhead. Marianne is panicked, and panicked people make mistakes." "She is not just panicked," I said. "She is moving." I turned my laptop screen toward Renee. I had set up alerts for any real estate listings connected to the Phillips name. Nothing had popped up on the public MLS. But I had dug deeper, monitoring the off-market chatter on commercial real estate forums. "Look at this," I said. It was a listing on a private broker network, prime lakefront estate. Quick close required, cash only. The address wasn't listed, but the photo was unmistakable. It was the view from the deck of the lake house, the same deck where I had confronted Ava. "She is selling the lake house," I said. Renee squinted at the screen. That property was specifically bequeathed to Ava. "Marianne cannot sell it. She is the executor," I reminded her. "She has the power to liquidate assets to pay estate debts. She will claim she needs the cash to cover the payroll." I froze. She's going to sell Ava's inheritance to save her own skin. "Who is the buyer?" Renee asked. I clicked on a thread below the listing. Under contract, Juniper Vale Properties. I ran a search on Juniper Vale Properties. It was an investment group based in New Jersey that specialized in distressed assets. They bought properties for 60 cents on the dollar, usually from people facing foreclosure or divorce. The asking price was $1.2 million. The property was worth $3 million. "She is dumping it," I said. "She is trying to turn the dirt into cash before we can stop her." Renee pulled out her phone. "I am calling the judge. We need a specific injunction blocking this sale. The general freeze on the estate might not cover a specific asset liquidation if she frames it as an emergency business expense." "Do it," I said. Renee filed the motion within the hour. Emergency restraining order against dissipation of assets. We argued that the executor was selling property well below market value, causing irreparable harm to the beneficiaries. The court granted it by 4 o'clock. The order was clear. No sale, transfer, or encumbrance of the property known as the lake house until further review. We served it to Marianne's attorney, Mr. Sloan, immediately. I thought that would stop her. I thought a court order was a wall she couldn't climb. I was wrong. 2 days later, I received a notification from the county recorder's office, a service I had subscribed to the day I arrived. It wasn't a deed transfer. It was a memorandum of option. I opened the document. Marianne had signed an agreement with Juniper Vale Properties. It wasn't a sale. It was an exclusive option to purchase, valid for 6 months, but the terms were buried in the fine print. In exchange for the option, Juniper Vale had paid a non-refundable option fee of $300,000. The money had been wired directly to a new account at a different bank, one not covered by the Crestbridge freeze. She bypassed the injunction. I said, staring at the screen. She didn't sell the house. She sold the right to buy the house later. Took $300,000 in cash today, and technically didn't violate the order because title didn't change hands. Renee was furious. It is bad faith. She paced around the room. It is contempt of court. We can have her thrown in jail for this. But that takes time, I said. And she has the $300,000 now. She can use that to pay the lawyers, pay off a few loud vendors, and keep fighting us for another 6 months. I realized then that civil court wasn't enough. Marianne viewed the law as a set of obstacles to be navigated, not rules to be followed. She would just keep creating shell companies, option agreements, and consulting fees until there was nothing left. I need to escalate. I said, Lucy, be careful. Renee warned, I am done being careful. I am going to the feds. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for protection. If Marianne was willing to sell her daughter's inheritance for pennies on the dollar just to stay afloat, she was dangerous. If the house of cards collapsed while I was still fighting her in civil court, the authorities might look at the mess and see me as part of it. I was a guarantor. I was a landlord. My name was on the dirty documents. I needed to be the whistleblower, not the defendant. I went to the website for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I found the hotline number for reporting suspicious activity related to money laundering and identity theft. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed. My hand hovered over the keypad. Calling this number was the point of no return. Once the government opened a file, I couldn't close it. I couldn't negotiate a settlement that kept the family reputation intact. This would bring audits, subpoenas, and likely handcuffs. I thought about my father's note. If this goes missing, it means I was right about M. He hadn't been able to stop her. He had died trying to hide the evidence. I dialed the number. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with an agent named Officer Miller. I gave him everything, the Bright Hollow charity washing money to the Lake Glass Shell, the identity theft at Crestbridge, the option scheme with Juniper Vale. When I hung up, I felt a strange, cold calm. The machinery of the state was now turning. It was slow, but it was heavy. That night, my laptop pinged with a new email. Subject: read this. Sender: afed333@gmail.com. I didn't recognize the address. I opened it. There was no body text. Just a login and a password. User: House Admin. Pass: Greyhaven 9990, and a link to a cloud storage drive. I stared at it. AFED. Ava Phillips. She had done it. She had cracked. The pressure of the last week, the realization that her mother had sold her art school tuition and now was selling her lake house, had finally pushed her over the edge. I clicked the link. It was the digital nervous system of Marianne Phillips' life. It was an archive of emails, spreadsheets, and scanned documents going back 10 years. I started digging. I found folder after folder of banal domestic management, catering menus, landscape contracts, invitation lists, but buried in the subfolders were the gears of the fraud. I found a folder labeled Signatures. Inside were high-resolution scans of my father's signature, my signature, and even Graham Pell's signature. There were templates for overlaying these onto PDF documents. She hadn't even hired a professional forger. She had done it herself, using Photoshop and a high-quality printer. I found a spreadsheet labeled Account Flow. It tracked every dollar. One column was labeled Clean. These were the legitimate business accounts. Another column was labeled Dirty. These were the flows through Lake Glass and the charity. And then I found it. A tab on the spreadsheet labeled Lucy Cover. I clicked it. It was a ledger of every time she had used my identity. August 15, 2016. Crestbridge Act Open. $480K. Transfer. Purpose: liquidity injection for Reno. July 10, 2019. Merrow County Duplex. Purchase. $300K. Purpose: asset hide, rental income stream. March 4, 2021. Credit line guarantee renewal. Purpose: risk transfer. I read the entries. Asset hide, risk transfer. There was no emotion in the spreadsheet. No "I hate Lucy," no "revenge on the stepdaughter." It was purely utilitarian. I wasn't a person to her. I was a resource. I was a credit score to be harvested. I was a name to be used when she needed to stash an asset she didn't want the IRS to see, or a liability she didn't want to carry. The cruelty was so banal it took my breath away. She hadn't cut me out of the family because she despised me. She had kept me involved in the most toxic way possible because I was useful. I was the designated bag holder. I closed the laptop. I went into the bathroom and dry heaved into the sink. The next morning, Marianne called a mediation session. She didn't call it that, of course. She called it a family meeting. She sent a message through Mr. Sloan saying that she was ready to discuss a resolution. We met in a neutral location, a conference room at a hotel in the next town over. Not Hartwell and Sloan, not the house. Renee came with me. Marianne was alone. She looked impeccable. She was wearing a cream-colored suit, her hair perfectly coiffed. She didn't look like a woman whose credit was frozen and who was under federal investigation. She looked like the matriarch of Greyhaven. She stood up when I entered. "Lucy," she said warmly, "thank you for coming." I sat down, keeping the table between us. I didn't smile. Cut the act. "Marianne," I said, "I saw the option deal on the lake house. I know about the $300,000. She waved a hand dismissively. That was necessary business. "Lucy, we have employees to pay. I am doing what I have to do to keep the lights on. Something you clearly do not care about. I care about the law." I said, "The law is a tool." She said, sitting down, "It is not a Bible. Your father knew that. He knew that sometimes you have to move things around to make it work. Do not bring him into this." I said, "I saw the note. Marianne, he was terrified of you." She sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. He was weak at the end. He lost his nerve. I was the one who held it all together. Do you think this lifestyle pays for itself? Do you think the tuition, the cars, the status? Do you think that just happens? She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. I did it for the family. Lucy, even for you. For me? I laughed. A harsh, barking sound. You stole my identity. You put a $2 million debt on my head. You bought a duplex in my name to hide cash. I was building a portfolio. She insisted. If the business failed, that duplex was an asset. You would have had something. You put the liability on me. I said, you put the risk on me. Someone had to carry it. She snapped. Ava couldn't. She is too soft. Your father was too sick. You were the strong one. Lucy, you were the one who could handle it. You were thousands of miles away. It didn't hurt you. You didn't even know about it until you came back looking for trouble. I stared at her. She truly believed it. In her twisted, narcissistic worldview, using my social security number to commit bank fraud was a compliment. It was an acknowledgement of my competence. You would have ruined it anyway, she said, her voice dropping to a softer, more maternal register. You were always so rigid, so black and white. You never understood that the world is gray. I was trying to protect the estate from your lack of imagination. I looked at this woman who had raised me from the age of 10. I looked for a shred of guilt, a flicker of remorse. There was nothing, just calculation. And in that moment, the last heavy chain of grief broke. I had come back to Greyhaven wanting an apology. I had wanted her to admit she was wrong. I had wanted, deep down, for my father to have fought for me. But I realize now that I was looking for love in a hardware store. They didn't sell it here. Marianne was incapable of seeing me as anything other than a line item in her clean versus dirty spreadsheet. I didn't need her to understand. I didn't need her closure. I just needed to be paid. I stood up. I am done talking. Marianne, I turned to Renee. What is the number? Renee opened her file. Based on the fraudulent transfers, the stolen advancement, the duplex equity, and the emotional damages, we calculate the restitution at $1.8 million. Marianne laughed. I do not have $1.8 million. The accounts are frozen. We know. I said, that is why we are not asking for cash. Renee slid a document across the table. We are proposing a settlement, Renee said. You will transfer the ownership of the lake house to Lucy, free and clear of the Juniper Vale option, which you will void. You will transfer the liquid assets currently held in the Lake Glass accounts, and you will sign a confession of judgment for the remainder. Marianne picked up the document. She looked at it with disdain. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial. I said, and while we are in trial, the federal investigation I triggered yesterday will catch up to you, and you will go to prison. Her eyes snapped to mine. You called the feds? I nodded. They have the tax returns for the charity. They have the identity theft report. It is already in motion. Marianne, the only way you stay out of a cell is if you settle this civil case immediately and use your remaining resources to hire a very good criminal defense attorney. She paled. For the first time, the composure fractured completely. You ungrateful little witch, she whispered. Sign the settlement. I said, or I walk out. And the next person you talk to is an FBI agent. She looked at the paper. She looked at me. She saw that I wasn't bluffing. Fine, she spat. I will sign. But I can't transfer the lake house today. The deed is in the safe. You don't need the deed, Renee said. You just need to sign the transfer authorization. Marianne grabbed a pen. She signed the paper with a vicious scratch. There, she said, shoving it back. Take it. Take the house. It has dry rot anyway. I picked up the paper. I looked at the signature. Marianne Phillips. I looked at Renee. Renee shook her head slightly. This isn't enough, Renee said. Marianne glared. What do you mean? I am the executrix. I have the power to transfer. Not anymore, Renee said. The court suspended your powers pending the hearing on the forgery. You can agree to the settlement, but you cannot legally execute the transfer of the corporate assets or the real estate. Then who can? Marianne demanded. The judge hasn't appointed a new administrator yet. I looked at the corporate bylaws I had found in the email archive. There was a clause about emergency succession. In the event of the incapacity or suspension of the president, Marianne, the temporary authority to bind the company fell to the vice president. Who is the vice president of Phillips Meridian? I asked. Marianne went silent. Her eyes darted to the side. I knew the answer. She had appointed this person years ago, purely for optics, to make the company look like a multi-generational enterprise for the bank. It is Ava, I said. Marianne stood up. No, absolutely not. Ava does not touch this. She has to. I said, she is the named vice president. She is the only one with the legal authority to execute this transfer while you are suspended. Marianne slammed her hand on the table. You will not go near her. She is weak. You will manipulate her. I am not manipulating anyone. I said, I am following the bylaws you wrote. I turned to leave. I need Ava's signature. I said, once I have that, the settlement is valid. I get my restitution. You get to keep the scraps. Marianne lunged for the door, blocking my path. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure desperation. Lucy, please, do not involve her. She doesn't understand the business. She will sign anything you put in front of her. I know, I said coldly. That is exactly how you raised her. I stepped around Marianne. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was strong, her nails digging into my skin. If you make her choose, Marianne hissed, you destroy her. She cannot survive without me. She is not surviving with you, I said. I pulled my arm free. I walked out of the conference room. Renee followed me. We stood in the hallway. She is right about one thing, Renee said. Ava is the weak link. If Marianne gets to her first, she will lock her in a room and terrify her into silence. Then I have to get to her first. I said, I checked my phone. I had the house admin login. I checked the calendar. Ava had a recurring appointment on Thursday nights. Therapy. Except I knew it wasn't real therapy. It was a wellness coach in the city, paid for by the company. But the driver logs in the email archive showed that Ava didn't always go to the coach. Sometimes. The car stopped at a small dive bar on the edge of the warehouse district. She goes there to hide, I said. To drink where no one knows her name. I looked at Renee. Draft the transfer documents, I said. The deed for the lake house, the wire authorization for the lake glass funds, and the voiding of the guarantee. I am going to find my sister, and I am going to ask her to do the one thing Marianne never let her do, make a decision. The plan Renee and I drafted was not designed to be dramatic. Drama is for people who want attention. I wanted results. If we went to trial, Marianne would drag it out for 5 years, burning through the remaining assets and legal fees until there was nothing left but a hollow shell of a company and a stack of unpaid bills. She would rather rule over a pile of ashes than let me walk away with a brick. So I decided to bypass the courtroom and go straight to the plumbing. I intended to turn the valve that controlled the money. redirecting the flow from Marianne's pockets into a court-controlled escrow account where she couldn't touch it. But to turn that valve, I needed the key, and the key was Ava. I texted her at 4 p.m. "Meet me at the office, 8 o'clock, tonight, just us. If you do not come, I file the federal complaint naming you as a co-conspirator tomorrow morning." I didn't offer to meet at a coffee shop or a park. I wanted her in the building. I wanted her to sit in the chair she technically owned, but was terrified to occupy. I waited for her in the executive suite of Phillips Meridian Holdings. The office was silent, a ghost ship of mahogany and glass. The cleaning crew had already left. The city lights of Greyhaven twinkled below, a deceptive picture of peace. I sat at my father's desk. It was the first time I had sat there. The leather chair was worn, shaped by the weight of a man who had spent his life building something his wife was now dismantling for spare parts. At 8:15, the elevator chimed. Ava walked in. She looked small in the cavernous hallway. She was wearing a trench coat belted tightly at the waist, her hands shoved deep into her pockets. She stopped in the doorway of the office. "You are sitting in his chair," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Someone has to." I said, "Come in, Ava. Close the door." She stepped inside and pushed the heavy door shut. The click of the latch echoed in the room. "What do you want?" "Lucy?" she asked. "Staying near the wall. Mom is going crazy. She says you are trying to steal the house. She says you are vindictive." I picked up the file folder I had placed on the blotter. "I am not here to steal anything. Ava, I am here to stop the theft that has been happening for 7 years." I opened the folder. "Come here," I said. "Look at this." She hesitated, then walked slowly toward the desk. She looked like a frightened deer approaching a trap. I laid out the spreadsheet, the printout from Marianne's house admin archive. "This is Mom's personal ledger." I said, "Look at the tab name." She looked down. "Lucy Cover." "What is that?" she asked. "It is a list." I explained. "A list of every time she used my identity to hide an asset or transfer a debt. The bank account, the duplex, the guarantor loans." I pointed to a line item dated 3 years ago. "Transfer to Lake Glass, $50,000. Source, Phillips Meridian operating account. Purpose, Ava Gallery opening, expense offset." I watched her read it. "She paid for your gallery opening with company money." I said, "But she marked it as a consulting expense to her shell company. She stole from the business, pretended it was a vendor payment, and used it to buy you a career." Ava's face went pale. "She told me the gallery sponsored me. She said I won a grant. There was no grant. Ava, it was money laundered through a fake vendor. You are not an artist to her. You are a tax write-off." I flipped the page to the board resolutions. "And here," I said, "this is the document she wants you to sign next week. It authorizes the sale of the lake house to Juniper Vale." Ava shook her head. "No. She said we were just refinancing. She promised me we were keeping the lake house. It is the only place I feel safe." Read the text. "Ava, sale of fee, simple interest. She is selling it. She is cashing out your inheritance because she needs the liquidity to fight me." Ava stared at the document. Her hands started to tremble, a fine vibration that traveled up her arms. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would she lie to me?" I did everything she asked. I stayed. I was the good daughter, because to her, people are inventory. I said, "I was the inventory she used for debt. You are the inventory she uses for image. But now that the money is running out, she is liquidating the inventory." Ava looked up at me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but the fear was shifting into something else. Betrayal. "She told me you left because you hated us," Ava said. Her voice cracked. "She told me you thought you were better than us. That you went to Chicago and became a big shot and looked down on this town. She said if I ever reached out to you, you would just mock me. I never mocked you. Ava, I left because I couldn't breathe here, and I didn't reach out because every time I called, she answered the phone. I stood up, I walked around the desk. I am not asking you to love me. Ava, I am asking you to save yourself. If you do not sign the papers I have tonight, the federal investigation will swallow this whole building. The IRS doesn't care that you were manipulated. They only care that your signature is on the tax returns." "What papers?" she asked. I slid 3 documents across the polished wood. "The first is a board resolution," I said. "As the vice president of Phillips Meridian, you are acknowledging that the company failed to notify the guarantor, me, of the change in control. This formally voids my liability for the $2 million debt." Ava looked at it. "The second is a banking authorization," I continued. "It instructs Crestbridge Bank to transfer $1.8 million from the corporate holding account into a court-supervised escrow account. This is my restitution. It locks the money away where Marianne cannot spend it, and I cannot touch it until the judge signs off." "And the third?" she asked. "The third is a resignation," I said. "Yours? You resign from the board and from the executorship, effective immediately, citing a conflict of interest. It gets you out of the line of fire." She looked at the papers. She looked at the pen. "If I sign this," she said softly, "Mom is finished. She loses control of the money. She loses the house deal. She loses everything. She lost it years ago. Ava, she is just using your future to pay for the past." Ava picked up the pen. It was a heavy silver fountain pen that had belonged to our father. She held it over the paper. "She is going to scream," Ava whispered. "She is going to be so angry." "Let her scream," I said. "You are the one holding the pen." Ava closed her eyes for a second. She took a deep breath, a shuddering intake of air that seemed to rattle her ribs. Then she opened her eyes. "I am sorry, Lucy," she said, for believing her. She lowered the pen. She signed the board resolution. "Ava Phillips." She signed the banking authorization. "Ava Phillips." She signed the resignation. "Ava Phillips." The scratch of the nib on the paper was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a dynasty cracking. She put the pen down. She looked at me, and her shoulders slumped, as if a physical weight had been cut from her back. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said, picking up the documents. "We let the law do the work." I didn't hug her. It wasn't that kind of moment. We were 2 soldiers on a battlefield, covered in mud, acknowledging that we had both survived. "Go home, Ava," I said. "Pack a bag. Go to the city. Do not be there when she finds out." Ava nodded. She turned and walked out of the office, her trench coat fluttering behind her. She didn't look back. I waited until she was gone. Then I scanned the documents and emailed them to Renee. "It is done," I typed. "File them." The next morning, the bomb detonated. I wasn't there to see it, but Renee told me later, at 9 o'clock, Marianne logged into the Phillips Meridian corporate portal at Crestbridge Bank. She likely intended to move the $300,000 from the Juniper Vale option into her personal account, instead of the dashboard. She saw a red banner, "Access denied, account status, restricted, see administrator." She called the bank. Screaming at the branch manager, she demanded to know why her access was blocked. The manager, armed with the resolution Ava had signed the night before, informed her that the vice president had authorized a transfer of funds to a court escrow, and that, due to the pending identity theft investigation and the authorized resignation, all remaining access credentials had been suspended pending a board review. Marianne drove to the bank. She demanded to see the manager. She threatened to sue. But banks are simple creatures. They fear liability more than they fear angry widows. They had a signed resolution from the acting corporate officer, Ava, and they had a federal fraud flag on the account from me. They locked the doors. By noon, the transfer was complete. $1.8 million moved from the Phillips Meridian accounts into the escrow account controlled by the outcome of my lawsuit. The operating account was drained. The war chest was empty. The final hearing took place 3 days later. It wasn't dramatic. There were no weeping confessions or surprise witnesses. It was a procedural hearing in a quiet courtroom with beige walls. Marianne didn't show up. Mr. Sloan appeared on her behalf, looking tired and defeated. "Your Honor," Mr. Sloan said, shuffling his papers, My client withdraws her opposition to the accounting motion. We are currently assessing the solvency of the estate. The judge looked at the documents Renee had filed. The forensic report on the signature, the affidavit from Ava, the federal compliance notices. The court acknowledges the transfer of funds to escrow, the judge said, his voice dry. These funds will remain frozen until the conclusion of the federal inquiry into the Bright Hollow Foundation and the related allegations of fraud. The estate of Robert Phillips is hereby stayed. An independent administrator will be appointed to oversee the remaining assets. He banged the gavel. It was over. I didn't feel a rush of triumph. I just felt tired. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright, harsh sunlight of Greyhaven. You got it, Renee said, putting a hand on my shoulder. The money is safe. Once the feds finish their audit, that escrow gets released to you as restitution. You get your $1.8 million. I nodded. And Marianne? Renee looked at the town square across the street. She is done. Lucy, the bank is foreclosing on the main estate next week. The option deal on the lake house is dead. Because she can't deliver clear title. She has no liquidity. She's going to spend the next 10 years answering questions from the IRS and the FBI. I looked at the town. The perfect life Marianne had built was gone. The news broke that afternoon. Bright Hollow Foundation suspends operations. Amidst federal probe. The phone at the Phillips Meridian office stopped ringing because the lines were disconnected. The lenders, smelling blood in the water, called in every note. The empire my father had built, which Marianne had hollowed out from the inside, collapsed under the weight of its own rot. I didn't stay to watch the fire burn. I packed my bags at the hotel. I checked out, but before I left, I had one stop to make. I drove to the cemetery on the hill overlooking the river. The grass was green, manicured to perfection. I found my father's grave. The headstone was polished granite, tasteful and expensive. Robert Phillips, beloved husband and father. I stood there for a long time. The wind rustled the leaves of the oak trees. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the piece of yellow legal paper, the note he had left in the safe deposit box. If this goes missing, it means I was right about him. He had been right, but he had also been complicit. He had let her do it because he was too tired, or too in love, or too afraid of the scandal to stop her. He had sacrificed me to keep the peace. I knelt down. I dug a small hole in the soft earth at the base of the headstone with my car key. I folded the note until it was the size of a stamp. I placed it in the hole and covered it with dirt. I loved you. Dad, I said out loud. My voice sounded small in the emptiness of the graveyard. But love didn't protect me. I had to protect myself. I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I just turned and walked back to the car. I drove out of Greyhaven as the sun began to set. I watched the town disappear in my rearview mirror. The church steeple, the bank, the Victorian roofs. It was a place that had tried to erase me, and in the end, I had been the only one real enough to survive it. My phone rang. It was connected to the car's Bluetooth. It was Renee. Lucy, she said, I just got off the phone with the lead agent at the FBI field office. Is there a problem? I asked, merging onto the highway. Not a problem, Renee said, but a development. They are expanding the scope. Expanding how? They found more accounts. Lucy, not just in New York. They found a trust registered in the Caymans. It is listed under a variation of your name, L. Phillips Holdings. I gripped the steering wheel. How much is in it? I asked. We do not know yet, Renee said, but the agent thinks it might be substantial. Marianne was moving money offshore for years. They want you to come in for a debriefing next week. They need your help to decrypt the files. I looked at the road ahead. The skyline of Westfall was rising in the distance, a silhouette of steel and glass against the purple sky. I thought I was done. I thought I'd closed the book. But revenge, I realized, is not a destination. It is a process. It is the long, slow work of untangling the knots that other people tied in your life. I am not free yet. Am I? I asked. No, Renee said softly. But you are driving the car. I smiled. A small, grim smile. I will be there next week. Renee, I hung up. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The engine roared, a sound of power and capability. I drove toward the city, toward the fight, toward the uncertain future that belonged. Finally, only to me. Thank you for listening to this story. It was a journey into the dark side of inheritance and the price of reclaiming your identity. I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Lucy went too far? Or did she do exactly what was needed? Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed this unraveling of the Phillips family, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice served cold. Share your theories in the comments, and until next time, keep your eyes on the ledger.